In a galaxy where species compete for ultimate supremacy, humans are rewriting the rules, defying the belief that strength is tied to sheer power or size. Having adapted to a world fraught with dangers, humans have mastered resilience, a skill that rivals find unexpectedly formidable. Sam Grayson had been through countless cases, though few truly surprised her. That was until she saw this file from the Galactic Council, a briefing that seemed less fact and more fiction, almost as if it had been scribbled down after a council meeting gone awry. "Walk me through it one more time," Sam said, reclining back, arms crossed, scrutinizing the visibly unsettled Zenith official across from her. Dr. Malvac was discovered lifeless inside an elite research facility on Orquadia Prime, the counselor said, his voice unsteady. There was no sign of forced entry, no tampering with security protocols, and no apparent means of access. The whole place was in complete lockdown. "This inexplicable," Sam echoed, as if tasting the word. "That's one way of putting it. And what have the galaxy's brightest minds come up with so far?" The counselor's face fell. "Well, so far they've come up empty. Of course they have," Sam muttered, pressing her fingers to her temple. She'd seen these overanalytic, logic-driven think tanks in action before, and they had a talent for turning simple problems into puzzles. "So, let me get this straight. Your most celebrated experts pooled their brainpower and came up with zilch?" The Zenith counselor shifted uncomfortably. "I'd prefer a different phrasing, but yes, essentially, got it. I'll take a look," Sam said, standing up with a slight grin. "Tell them to keep out of my way." As she stepped through the sleek corridors of the Irradian security complex, her mind was already sorting through possible scenarios. Aliens loved their sophisticated gadgets, their hyper-advanced logic systems, and all their high-tech tools. Yet time and time again, she'd found that a case's solution usually had more to do with understanding behavior, and people, alien or human, tended to act in patterns. By the time she reached the investigation team, their skepticism was already apparent, a mix of silent challenge and open disdain. She noted Narek, the insectoid security chief from the Awen cluster, eyeing her with his mandibles twitching in apparent distaste. Next to him stood Gore, a gray-skinned scientist from Callus with 4 arms, his body language screaming reluctance to engage with a mere human. "Detective Grayson, I presume?" Gore's tone dripped with veiled irritation as he folded his 4 arms in an alien gesture of disdain. The council's last-ditch effort. Unfazed, Sam gave him a disarming smile. "Just here to solve the problem, Jiller. What do we know so far?" Jiller let out a resigned breath. "Dr. Malvac was in the middle of highly sensitive experiments when he died. We've ruled out all conceivable causes. No poison, no physical injuries, no apparent breach of security. It's simply beyond understanding," the counselor said with a shaky sigh. "Beyond understanding, huh?" Sam repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "All right, let me examine the scene myself before we start calling this one unsolvable. I'm sure you've all done thorough work, but sometimes it's the small things that slip by." Narek's mandibles twitched as he gave her a piercing look. "We don't miss things. Every inch of the station has been scrutinized for any irregularity. If you believe your human senses will uncover what our advanced technology could not, you're gravely mistaken." Sam just gave a casual shrug and a half-smile. "Maybe, but I'd bet otherwise." Without waiting for a response, she followed the team to the lab where Dr. Malvac had met his tragic end. The space was cold, pristine, and sterile, exactly the atmosphere she expected from a high-security lab. Alien equipment hummed and glowed quietly in the background, but Sam's attention wasn't on the tech. Instead, she was scanning for the subtle details that no machine could pick up. Moving slowly around the lab, Sam felt the skeptical stares of her alien colleagues. Narek folded his multiple arms in a defiant stance, while Gore stood with his hands on his hips, watching her like a parent tolerating a child's antics. But their opinions didn't concern her. She was focused on the tiny clues, the faint scratch on the floor, a slightly askew chair, and an unusual, almost imperceptible scent lingering in the air, overlooked by everyone else. "So, what exactly was Dr. Malvac researching?" Sam asked casually, her gaze fixed on the floor. "That's classified," Gore replied stiffly. "Of course it is," Sam muttered under her breath, crouching to examine a faint scuff mark near the table leg. Classified details weren't her concern. She cared about the ordinary, the seemingly unimportant things people dismissed when they thought no one was paying attention. In a place this sterile, anything out of place spoke volumes. Straightening up, she slid her hands into her jacket pockets. "Quick question," she said, glancing back at the group. "Did any of you take a look at the air filtration system?" Jiller gave her a blank look, clearly baffled. "The air filtration? Why would that matter?" Sam suppressed a smirk. "Probably doesn't. doesn't, but indulge me anyway. She could feel their dubious stares as she waited for a reply. Gore exchanged an incredulous look with Narek, whose mandibles clicked in what she guessed was the alien equivalent of, "Are you kidding me? We haven't prioritized the air filtration system," Gore said, his tone steeped in disdain. "Our focus has been on more sophisticated investigative methods." Sam rolled her eyes. "Naturally, because no one ever dies in a sealed lab from something as simple as lack of oxygen." Breaking his silence, Narek stepped forward, his towering, armored form casting a shadow over her. His deep voice, rough as gravel, echoed in the sterile room. "Detective Grayson," Narek's voice was measured, his tone dripping with disdain. "Your kind may rely on primitive instincts, but we, on the other hand, do not overlook the essentials. We've screened for toxins, radiation, and every conceivable form of air disturbance." Sam met his gaze, unflinching. "Good to know. But did it occur to you to check if someone might have tampered with the filters? Something subtle, something that wouldn't register unless you looked closely?" Gore let out an exasperated sigh, crossing his forearms in a display of frustration. "Grayson, we analyzed this room using every advanced spectrum available. If there was an anomaly, it would have what?" Sam cut in. "Showed up on one of your flashy holograms?" She leaned in, smiling slightly. "Look, sometimes the answer doesn't require your fancy equipment. Sometimes it just takes a gut feeling." Silence fell as she met their stares, her defiance daring them to argue. After a moment, Gore threw up two hands in resignation. "All right, fine. Have at it. Inspect the damn filtration system." Sam gave a nod, suppressing a smirk. It was always the same routine with these alien experts. They relied so heavily on their advanced tech that they missed the human perspective. She wasn't a genius in the technical sense, not like Gore or Narek, but she did understand one thing they didn't: the complexity of people. And sometimes that was all it took. "Oh, and while we're at it," she said, turning back to them, "why don't you run through who was in the station the day Malvac died? I need to know who had access." "Every individual in this lab is high security cleared," Narek said, as if that would answer her question. Sam smirked. "Great, they're all cleared on paper. Now tell me, who was actually here?" The list was short. Besides Malvac, only 4 others had been present in the building on the day of his death, all of whom the investigation team had promptly cleared. Sam's curiosity piqued as she reviewed the names. There was the Kill, Malvac's assistant from the amphibian species of Acnos, Poland, a Kian diplomat visiting to negotiate trade terms, Lelis, a Xene technician responsible for maintenance, and lastly, Arlok, an enigmatic envoy from the Herodon Empire, whose purpose there remained classified. All 4 were present at the time of Dr. Malvac's death, Gore explained, and each has a verified alibi. Sam raised an eyebrow. "Right, verified alibis, because everyone trapped in a room with a corpse always has one of those." Narek's gaze hardened, while Gore's patience thinned visibly. "Grayson, this isn't some common criminal investigation. These individuals are distinguished figures, each screened thoroughly. None of them would risk their reputation in such a primitive act as murder." Sam chuckled, and the sound seemed to unsettle both aliens. "You two are something else, you know that? Really, it's kind of sweet. You actually believe people don't make idiotic choices, even your so-called distinguished ones." Rising from her crouch, she dusted off her hands. "All right, so what do we have? A dead scientist for distinguished visitors, and a locked room with no forced entry. Tell me this, what sort of sensitive project was Malvac working on that would get him killed?" Narek gave her the same answer Gore had already provided. "That information is strictly classified." Yeah, I got that part, but I'm guessing it's classified because it's exactly the kind of thing someone would want to get their hands on, right?" Gore hesitated, casting a wary glance at Narek before finally conceding. "That's a possibility, but we've ruled out espionage. No data was taken." Sam nodded thoughtfully, mentally filing that detail away. "All right, one more question before I dive into the filters. This Arlix guy, what's his story? Herodons aren't exactly known for casual visits, are they?" Narek's mandibles twitched slightly. "Arlix is an official emissary. His reasons for being here are confidential." "Right, of course," Sam replied, her eyes narrowing. "And he has an alibi too, I assume?" "He was located in a different section of the station at the time of Malvac's death," Gore replied. "He was with 3 Xene officials. His whereabouts are indisputable." Sam didn't like the sound of that. When someone's alibi was too airtight, it usually gave her more reason to be suspicious. But that line of questioning could wait. First, she needed to confirm her own theory. "I'll check out the filtration system now," she said, turning away. "Don't wander off too far. I may have a few more common-sense questions for you." Kneeling by the air filtration unit, she began a close inspection while the alien investigators exchanged skeptical glances, their expressions silently asking, what could she possibly find there? Sam could almost almost sense their disbelief. To them, the idea that something as ordinary as an air filter could provide a breakthrough was laughable. But Sam knew better. Often, the simplest details were the most overlooked. "All right," she murmured, carefully unscrewing the casing. "Let's see what your advanced equipment missed." With a firm tug, she opened the panel. To the untrained eye, everything appeared spotless. But Sam had spent her life noticing details that others ignored. Growing up on Earth had taught her to pick out the one good apple in a pile of bad ones. And here, she was doing the opposite, finding the single bad piece in a well-maintained system. "Gotcha," she whispered. Hidden in the vent, camouflaged almost perfectly among the coils, was a tiny device barely the size of her thumb. Its placement was so precise that it blended seamlessly into the machinery, escaping the notice of the station's advanced sensors. Sam leaned in closer, watching the subtle blink of a tiny light. Well, she muttered, carefully removing the device. Holding it up, she called out, "Hey, Gore, Narek, you might want to come see this." Both aliens rushed over, their skepticism replaced by intrigue as they spotted the small device in her hand. Gore's many eyes widened in surprise. "What is that?" "My guess," Sam said, examining the device. "A signal disruptor. It's just enough to interfere with the system, but not enough to set off any alarms. You wouldn't catch it unless you were specifically searching for it." Narek's mandibles clicked again, this time with irritation. "How did this evade our scans? We examined every inch of the station systems." Sam shrugged. "Maybe your scanners weren't set up to catch something this basic. You guys tend to assume everything has to be high-tech and intricate, but this," Sam said, holding up the device, "this is a very human trick." Gore stared at the tiny device, his face twisting in disbelief. "And what exactly does it do?" "Well, judging by where it was hidden," Sam replied, spinning it between her fingers, "I'd say it was interfering with the airflow in here. Not enough to cause immediate harm, but just enough to slowly reduce oxygen levels. At first, it'd feel normal, but over time, it would start causing symptoms. Dizziness, confusion, eventually unconsciousness, then death." Narek's expression darkened, his voice lowering. "You're saying Malvac suffocated without anyone noticing?" "Pretty much," Sam said. "He probably didn't realize it himself. It would have felt like he was just getting drowsy, like sitting in a room with stale air and drifting off without knowing why. Only in his case, he never woke up." Gore's disbelief grew as he shook his head. "This is preposterous. How could someone install such a rudimentary device here, in a secure station, without tripping any alarms? And why would they even want to?" Sam pocketed the device and shrugged. "That's the big question, isn't it? Who had both the knowledge and opportunity to pull this off, and most importantly, what was their reason?" Narek's gaze moved to the list of those who'd been in the station when Malvac died. Only a small number of individuals were present at the time. Any one of them might have tampered with the filtration system before entering, right? Sam agreed, but there's a catch. Whoever did this needed to know how to bypass your security systems without setting off any warnings. This isn't something you can do on the fly. It took both precision and planning. She looked pointedly at Gore and Narek, waiting for them to draw the same conclusion. After a moment of silence, Gore finally spoke up. "Are you implying that one of our scientists did this?" Sam shrugged. "I'm just saying that whoever planted this device had access and knew exactly how you'd all react, focusing on high-tech answers and overlooking the straightforward approach." Narek's mandibles clicked in frustration. "But why would anyone want to kill Malvac? He was highly respected across the galaxy. His research was essential to interstellar science." Sam smirked. "That's what we're here to find out. Someone had a reason, and they pulled it off without leaving so much as a fingerprint." Gore's eyes narrowed, his gaze distant as he considered the possibilities. Poland, the Kian diplomat, had a lot to lose if Malvac's research succeeded. His trade agreements would become worthless. "Could be," Sam acknowledged, "but we don't know yet. We'll need to dig into who stood to benefit most from Malvac's death. It's rarely the most obvious suspect." Sam stood, stretching her back as she glanced around the room. She could feel the case beginning to tilt in her favor. The aliens had been so wrapped up in what should have been impossible that they'd overlooked what was right in front of them. "All right," she said, looking around. "We've got a signal scrambler hidden in the vents, a dead scientist, and 4 suspects. Now we just have to figure out who's desperate enough to pull off something this low-tech," Sam remarked, her tone laced with a wry smile. "My guess? Whoever did this thinks they're way too smart to get caught." Gore frowned, his expression skeptical. "And what makes you think that?" Sam's smile deepened, her eyes glinting with a hint of humor. "Because it's always the same story. The smarter someone thinks they are, the more they underestimate everyone else. But you can't hide a crime from someone who's seen all the shades of stupidity, and trust me, I've seen it all." With that, she turned and strode toward the the exit, leaving Gore and Narek to process her discovery. "Let's go have a little chat with our suspects," she called over her shoulder. "I have a feeling someone's about to slip up." Her footsteps echoed through the cold, sterile hallways as she made her way to the interrogation room. She'd been here before, multiple suspects, each harboring their own motives, each clinging to a carefully crafted story. The real trick was letting them unravel themselves, and Sam knew these aliens would be just as prone to it as any human back on Earth. Inside the Stark room, the 4 suspects sat around a long table, looking anything but cooperative. Phil, the amphibian assistant, fidgeted nervously, his slimy green skin gleaming under the overhead lights. Poland, the Kian diplomat, sat stiffly, his pale face impassive, hiding his thoughts. Lelis, the Zine technician, tapped her clawed fingers against the table in a steady rhythm, as if mentally calculating something. And Arlix, the Herodon envoy, reclined with an air of aloof superiority, his dark robes pooling around him like shadows. Sam entered slowly, letting the silence hang in the room. She'd learned long ago that silence could be more unsettling than any intimidation tactic. After a tense pause, it was Poland who broke first, his voice cutting through the stillness with irritation. "Detective Grayson, I hope this won't take long. I have more pressing matters to attend to than indulging in this charade." Sam smirked as she dropped into a chair across from him. "I'm sure you do," she replied coolly. "But here's the thing, we've got a dead scientist, and you're one of the select few who had access to the room where he died. So forgive me if I take my time." Poland's lips pressed together, but he didn't argue. Sam shifted her gaze to the others, speaking evenly. "Here's the situation, everyone. Someone tampered with the air filtration system. I found a little surprise hidden in the vents, a device designed to mess with the airflow, making it feel like everything was normal while it slowly cut off Malvac's oxygen. Not exactly groundbreaking, but clever enough to avoid detection." Phil's eyes went wide, and his voice quivered with anxiety. I don't know anything about that. I barely understand the filtration system, let alone how to mess with it." "Relax, Phil," Sam said, waving a dismissive hand. "I'm not pointing fingers." Yet, she turned her attention to Arlix, who remained silent, his arms crossed as he watched her with a trace of amusement in his dark, calculating eyes. "Arlix, you've been awfully quiet for someone sitting in a room full of suspects. Got anything you'd like to add?" Sam's tone was light, but her gaze was sharp. Arlix gave a faint smile, his voice steady and calm. "I have nothing to contribute, Detective. My purpose here is entirely diplomatic. I wasn't even close to the lab when the incident occurred." Sam replied, her eyes narrowing. "That's what your witnesses said too. But your people have a bit of a reputation for flexibility with the truth when it suits you." Arlix's voice dropped, laced with a hint of warning. "Careful, Detective. Making baseless accusations against an envoy of the Herodon Empire is unwise." Sam grinned, unfazed. "Don't worry, I'm not making any accusations yet, just stirring things up to see what rises to the surface." Poland sighed, his irritation clear. "This entire situation is absurd. Why would any of us harm Malvac? He was a respected scientist. His research held value for all of us here. Valuable enough to kill for?" Sam asked, one eyebrow raised. Poland's posture stiffened. "If his project had succeeded, we all would have reaped the benefits. The findings would have been shared, right? Except that's rarely how things work in politics, is it?" Sam leaned back in her chair. "There's always someone who stands to lose more than they gain. So maybe Malvac's success wasn't something everyone here wanted." Finally, Leela spoke, her voice measured and dry. "Malvac's research was destabilizing. If he succeeded, entire trade networks would become redundant. Some economies would collapse while others would rise. The stakes were very high." "Exactly," Sam said, nodding. "And high stakes often make people take desperate risks. So here's my theory. Someone in this room realized that Malvac's work was going to ruin their plans, and instead of handling it diplomatically, they decided to take the easy route, ensuring Malvac never finished his research." Arlix chuckled softly, his amusement evident. "An interesting theory, Detective. But without solid evidence, that's all it is. A theory." "Oh, I have a theory," Sam replied, rising from her chair. "But I also have a little piece of tech I found in the ventilation system. And here's the thing about devices like this, they always carry traces of their maker's style. A scan should easily reveal who designed it." The room fell silent, thick with tension. Sam let the weight of her words sink in before she continued. "So, if anyone here wants to come clean and save themselves a lot of trouble, now would be the perfect time to speak up." Phil looked on the verge of fainting. Lelis's fingers tapped the table faster, and Poland's jaw was clenched tightly. But it was Arlix who broke the silence, his voice as smooth as ever. "Theatrics aren't necessary, Detective. I had no involvement in Malvac's death, but I'm interested to see where this all leads. Oh, it's going somewhere, Sam replied, her eyes narrowing, and I'm guessing one of you already knows exactly where. With that, she turned toward the door. Pausing as she opened it, she glanced back at the group, her gaze steady. I'll be in touch, Sam said as she left the room, feeling that familiar surge of adrenaline. She'd shaken things up just enough, and now it was only a matter of time before someone's nerves got the best of them. People always cracked. It was just about waiting them out. Back in the lab, Sam joined Gore and Narek, who were busy analyzing the device she'd found. As she leaned over the equipment, she knew the results would confirm her suspicions. Well, she asked, watching Gore's frown deepen as he scanned the data. The device's components are fairly standard, but there are traces of materials unique to the Zealand system, he said. It's likely it was assembled by someone with access to those resources. Zealand, huh? Sam murmured, rubbing her chin thoughtfully. And who here is from Zealand? Lelis, Narek answered, his deep voice resonant. Sam nodded, feeling the pieces click into place. Right? Looks like it's time for a word with Lelis. She found Lelis pacing near the observation deck, her clawed fingers still drumming that rhythmic beat against the railing as she stared out into the vastness of space. Skipping formalities, Sam leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Lelis, we need to talk. The Zealand technician turned slowly, her reptilian eyes narrowing with a faint smirk. I figured you'd come to me eventually. Did you now? Sam raised an eyebrow. Well, you're right. We ran a scan on that little device I found in the air system. Turns out the materials trace back to the Zealand system. Lelis's smirk didn't falter, though her gaze sharpened. That's a flimsy connection, detective. I'm from Zealand, but I'm hardly the only one with access to its materials. True, Sam conceded, taking a step closer. But you're the only one here with the know-how to pull this off. I've done my homework. You're a systems integration specialist. You could rig something like this without even breaking a sweat. The amusement vanished from Lelis's eyes. This is all speculation, is it? Sam replied, her voice calm but cutting. Let me spell it out for you. You knew Malvac's research was going to shake up some major trade routes. His success would have disrupted entire industries, including those with deep ties to Zealand's economy. So, instead of letting him complete his work, you decided to take matters into your own hands. A small tweak to the air system, a device hidden just well enough to go unnoticed, and Malvac was out of the picture before anyone suspected a thing. Lelis's fingers drummed faster against the railing, a visible crack in her composure. You have no hard evidence, she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Sam shrugged. Maybe, but here's the thing, Lelis, murderers always make one mistake. They think they're too clever for anyone to catch them. They think no one notices the little details. But I notice. For the first time, Lelis's confidence wavered. Her fingers stilled, her eyes flashing with an edge of desperation. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice barely above a hiss. Malvac was going to ruin everything. His research wasn't just disruptive, it was dangerous. If he'd succeeded, entire ecosystems would have been wiped out. My people are livelihoods. They were all at risk, Lelis whispered, her voice barely holding steady. Sam nodded, her expression hardening. I get it. You thought you were doing what needed to be done. But killing someone? That's where you lost me. You could have spoken up, found another way to shut down the project. But instead, you took the easiest route. Lelis's eyes flickered toward the door, then back to Sam. Her claws clenched, her desperation evident as she took a step closer. I didn't have a choice. You don't understand the stakes. There's always a choice, Sam said softly. You just made the wrong one. For a moment, Sam thought Lelis might lunge, her expression a mixture of fear and anger. But instead, Lelis's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her. She looked away, her voice hollow. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I just needed more time. I thought delaying him would make someone else step in, shut down the project. I never meant for him to die. Yeah, well, intentions don't mean much when someone's gone, Sam replied, taking out her communicator to call Narek. We're done here. The room fell silent as Narek and his team led Lelis away in custody. Alone by the observation deck, Sam stared out at the stars, feeling the familiar weight settle in. Every time it was the same story, someone thinking they could control what was uncontrollable, that they were too clever to be caught. Greed, fear, ambition, the same motives, different species. Lelis had managed to fool the station's top investigators, but not Sam. Sam. She had seen this pattern play out too many times before. Gore approached quietly, his gray complexion looking even paler than usual. "You solved the case faster than I anticipated," he admitted, almost grudgingly. Sam glanced over with a smirk. "Guess that's why they call me in, huh? Not just for my sparkling personality." Gore's lips tightened as he crossed his arms, his usual posture when irritated. "Still, I can't help wondering. If we'd had more time, perhaps we could have found a way to resolve this without..." "Without what?" Sam interrupted, turning to face him. "Without someone getting hurt? Without any fallout? Hate to tell you, Gore, but there's no such thing as a clean solution when people are involved. Someone always pays." Gore's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't argue. "I suppose you're right. Look," Sam said, her tone softening, "you and your team are phenomenal with the big stuff, science, technology, things I couldn't even begin to understand. But when it comes to dealing with people, you're missing the details. And it's those details that usually crack cases like this." Gore's gaze shifted toward the window, thoughtful. "I'll consider that in future investigations." Sam chuckled. "Sure you will. And maybe next time you won't have to call me in," Sam added with a grin. Gore's expression was sharp as he replied, "You'll be summoned again. Of that I have no doubt." She gave him a mock salute. "Can't wait." As Sam made her way out of the station, the familiar sense of closure settled over her. It wasn't the kind of resolution most people looked for. Justice was rarely neat or satisfying. The guilty never felt justified, the victims never truly felt avenged, and those cleaning up the aftermath always knew it wasn't perfect. But it was enough. It had to be. Walking out into the quiet chill of the night, she muttered to herself, "Funny how everyone always overcomplicates the simple stuff."